For 5 years, she was the ICU's punching bag, the quiet nurse assigned the worst shifts, ignored by doctors, and mocked by arrogant colleagues. But everything changed the day a squad of United States Marines stormed the ward, bypassed the hospital director, and snapped a dead-straight salute directly to her. At Seattle's Mercy General Hospital, the Level 1 Trauma Intensive Care Unit was a war zone of a different kind. It was a place of frantic egos, high-stakes decisions, and a rigid, unspoken hierarchy. At the very top were the attending trauma surgeons. Below them were the charge nurses, fiercely protective of their authority. And at the very bottom, practically invisible against the sterile white walls, was Stella Blake. Stella was 36, though the heavy bags under her eyes and the gray strands threading through her tight, practical bun made her look older. She wore oversized, faded blue scrubs that swallowed her frame, masking a physique that was surprisingly taut and scarred. To the rest of the staff, Stella was simply the grunt. She was the nurse you handed the bedpans to. She was the one assigned to the delirious, combative patients. She took the holiday shifts nobody wanted, never complained, never gossiped in the break room, and rarely spoke above a whisper. Her direct supervisor was Lily Bennett, a 26-year-old charge nurse with perfectly balayaged hair, an aggressively loud stethoscope, and a master's degree in healthcare administration she never let anyone forget. Lily thrived on the drama of the ICU, treating the ward like a reality television set where she was the undisputed star. Stella, Lily's voice cut through the rhythmic beeping of the monitors one dreary Tuesday morning. She didn't look up from her clipboard. Bed 4 needs a full linen change. The patient blew out his IV line again, so there's blood everywhere. When you're done mopping that up, go restock the crash carts in the East Wing. I need it done before Dr. Henderson does his rounds. Understood, Stella replied softly, her voice devoid of any edge. She didn't argue that she was already managing 3 high-acuity patients while Lily was sipping an iced latte at the central desk. She simply turned on her heel and walked toward bed 4. If anyone had bothered to pay close attention to Stella Blake, they might have noticed the anomalies. They might have noticed that when a patient's heart monitor blared the terrifying, flatlining screech of a code blue, Stella didn't flinch. Her heart rate never spiked. While younger nurses panicked and scrambled for meds, Stella moved with a chilling, mechanical efficiency, drawing epinephrine, securing airways, and applying compressions with a perfectly measured, brutal rhythm. But nobody noticed. They only saw a quiet woman who kept her head down. The disrespect wasn't limited to the nursing staff. Dr. Paul Henderson, the head of trauma, regularly spoke over her. Once, during a chaotic shift, Stella had quietly suggested that a patient's plunging blood pressure wasn't due to internal bleeding, but rather a rare reaction to a specific antibiotic combination. "Nurse Blake," Dr. Henderson had sneered, loudly enough for the entire floor to hear. "When I want a pharmacist's opinion, I'll call the pharmacy. Until then, just hang the bags I tell you to hang." Stella had simply nodded, stepping back into the shadows. 2 hours later, when the patient nearly went into anaphylactic shock, Dr. Henderson frantically ordered the exact treatment Stella had silently prepped and left sitting on the counter. Lily, noticing the prepped meds, quickly handed them to the doctor, securing a glowing compliment for her quick thinking. Stella just watched from the doorway, her face an unreadable mask, before returning to empty a catheter bag. She preferred the invisibility. Being noticed meant answering questions, and Stella Blake had a past she had spent 6 years trying to bury. Beneath the oversized scrubs, a jagged starburst-shaped scar marred her left shoulder, the undeniable signature of shrapnel. In her small, sparsely decorated apartment across town, tucked inside a locked fireproof safe, sat a Purple Heart, a silver star, and a folded flag. She was completely content letting Lily Bennett play the hero of Mercy General. Stella had already seen enough real heroes die to know that the title was nothing but a curse. The quiet routine of Stella's miserable existence shattered on a freezing Thursday night in November. It was 2:14 a.m. The ICU was operating on a skeleton crew. Lily was dozing in the break room under the guise of catching up on paperwork, leaving Stella to monitor the floor alongside a terrified first-year resident, Dr. Adam Lewis. Suddenly, the red trauma phone at the central desk screamed. It wasn't the standard ring. It was the sharp, piercing tone indicating an incoming mass casualty or catastrophic trauma. Stella grabbed the receiver. "ICU, Blake." "We're coming up hot," the voice of the ER attending cracked over the line, laced with raw panic. "Motorcycle versus semi-truck on Interstate 5. Patient is a 22-year-old male. Active duty military, massive blunt force trauma, bilateral femur fractures, suspected crushed pelvis, and a flail chest. We dumped 6 units of O-negative into him downstairs, and he's still bleeding out. ETA to your doors is 2 minutes. Have the massive transfusion protocol ready, or he's dead before the sun comes up." "Copy," Stella said. Her voice didn't shake. She hung up the phone and slammed her hand onto the emergency alarm, flooding the ward with harsh, blinding fluorescent lights. "What is it?" Dr. Lewis stammered, dropping his pen. "Level 1 trauma, pelvic crush, flail chest, hemorrhagic shock," Stella stated, her demeanor shifting instantly. The slumped, invisible nurse vanished. Her shoulders squared. "I need the Belmont Rapid Infuser primed now. Get 2 central line kits open. Page Dr. Henderson and tell him to get his ass out of bed. We need an immediate X-lap." Dr. Lewis froze, overwhelmed by the sudden barrage of medical terms and the sheer authority radiating from the usually timid nurse. I should wake Lily." "Forget Lily," Stella barked, the sheer volume and command in her voice making the resident physically jump. It was the voice of a woman who had shouted over the deafening roar of Black Hawk helicopters and mortar fire. "Prime the infuser, doctor, now!" The double doors blew open, crashing against the walls. A team of paramedics sprinted into the ICU, pushing a gurney slick with blood. On top of it lay a young man, barely recognizable. His chest was violently shuddering, collapsing inward with every agonizing attempt to breathe. "His pressure is tanking, 60/40 and dropping," a paramedic yelled. They transferred him to bed 1. Stella descended on the patient like a hawk. While Dr. Lewis stood paralyzed at the foot of the bed, Stella was already moving. She grabbed heavy trauma shears and cut away the shreds of the young man's clothing. As the bloody fabric fell away, a distinct tattoo on the patient's right bicep was revealed. An eagle, globe, and anchor. The United States Marine Corps. Next to it, dog tags hung from a chain slick with crimson. Stella's eyes flicked to the tags. Miller, David J., USMC. Something inside Stella snapped tight. The sterile walls of the Seattle hospital faded. The smell of antiseptic was suddenly overpowered by the phantom scent of cordite and burning diesel. "He's coding!" the monitor shrieked, the line going terrifyingly flat. "No pulse!" "Starting compressions!" Dr. Lewis panicked, rushing forward. "No!" Stella physically shoved the doctor out of the way. "He has a flail chest. You do compressions now. You'll drive his shattered ribs straight through his heart." "Then what do we do?" Dr. Lewis screamed, completely losing his nerve. "We decompress," Stella said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. She didn't wait for the doctor's order. Grabbing a scalpel and a large-bore chest tube, she stepped up to the Marine. "Nurse Blake, you can't— That's a surgical procedure," Dr. Lewis gasped. "You'll lose your license." "If I don't, he loses his life," Stella fired back. Without a second of hesitation, she made a swift, precise incision between the Marine's ribs. She shoved her gloved fingers directly into the pleural space, feeling the rush of trapped air and blood blow past her hand. She forcefully guided the plastic tube into his chest cavity. Blood poured into the drainage canister. Instantly, the tension pneumothorax was relieved. "Pushing 1 milligram of epi," Stella ordered herself, grabbing a syringe and jamming it into his IV line. "Clear!" She grabbed the defibrillator paddles, slapped them onto his bloody chest, and sent the shock through his body. The young Marine arched off the bed. The monitor beeped once, then twice. A weak but steady rhythm returned. Just as the heart rate stabilized, Dr. Henderson, the head trauma surgeon, sprinted into the room, still buttoning his lab coat, with Lily hot on his heels, looking disheveled and annoyed. Dr. Henderson took one look at the blood-soaked bay, the chest tube perfectly inserted, and the stabilized monitor. He looked at Dr. Lewis, who was pale and trembling, and then at Stella, who was quietly wiping blood off her arms. "Excellent work, Dr. Lewis," Dr. Henderson breathed, stepping up to the bed. "A bilateral thoracostomy under this kind of pressure? That's attending-level work. You just saved this boy's life." Dr. Lewis opened his mouth to speak, to tell the truth, but he caught Stella's eye. She gave him a sharp, microscopic shake of her head. "Don't." Thank you, Dr. Henderson," the resident stammered, looking down at his clean hands. "Lily," Dr. Henderson barked at the charge nurse. "Take over the charting. I want this patient prepped for the OR immediately. Nurse Blake, get out of the way and clean up this mess. You're tracking blood into the hallway." "Yes, doctor," Stella murmured, her shoulders slumping back down as she grabbed a mop. For the next 4 days, Corporal David Miller clung to life. The hospital buzzed with gossip about the young, handsome Marine in Bed 1. When word got out that he was a highly decorated infantryman who had recently returned from a brutal deployment in the Middle East, the hospital administration smelled a public relations gold mine. The hospital director, Mr. Sterling, descended on the ICU with a team of photographers. They learned that Miller's commanding officers, along with several high-ranking military officials stationed at the nearby base, were coming to the hospital to formally present him with a commendation he had earned overseas, right there in his hospital bed. Lily Bennett went into overdrive. She swapped the shift schedules, ensuring she was assigned as Miller's primary nurse for the day of the brass's visit. She styled her hair, put on extra makeup, and practically shoved Stella into the utility closets whenever the administration walked by. "Stella, I need you on bedpan duty in the West Wing all afternoon," Lily ordered on the morning of the visit, aggressively straightening her own name tag. "The media is going to be here. We need the face of the ICU to look professional. And honestly, you look exhausted. Just stay out of sight." "Sure, Lily," Stella said, picking up a stack of fresh towels. At 1400 hours sharp, the heavy double doors of the ICU swung open. The frantic chatter of the nurses' station instantly died. Through the doors walked a detail of United States Marines in perfectly pressed dress blues. Leading the pack was a grizzled, imposing colonel with a chest full of ribbons, followed by 2 captains and a squad of heavily decorated enlisted men. Their polished shoes clicked in terrifying unison against the linoleum floor. The hospital director, Mr. Sterling, practically tripped over himself, rushing forward to greet them, a wide, camera-ready smile plastered on his face. Lily stood right behind him, posing perfectly. "Colonel, welcome to Mercy, General," Mr. Sterling beamed, extending a hand. "I am the hospital director. We have taken the absolute best care of Corporal Miller. Let me introduce you to our heroic head nurse, Lily, who has been tirelessly by his side." But the colonel didn't take the director's hand. He didn't even look at Lily. The colonel's cold, steel-gray eyes swept over the pristine nurses' station, past the cameras, past the confused doctors. His gaze bypassed all the shiny, important people in the room until his eyes locked onto the far corner of the ward. There, standing next to a biohazard bin holding a bag of soiled laundry, was Stella Blake. The colonel stopped dead in his tracks. The blood drained from his face, replaced instantly by an expression of absolute, unadulterated shock. "My God," the colonel whispered. He ignored the hospital director completely. He shoved past a stunned Dr. Henderson. The entire squad of Marines followed him, marching straight past the VIP delegation, their eyes locking onto the tired, invisible nurse holding the trash. Stella froze, the heavy bag slipping from her fingers and hitting the floor with a dull thud. The colonel stopped exactly 2 feet in front of her. He snapped his heels together with a violent crack that echoed through the dead silent ICU. Slowly, deliberately, the colonel raised his right hand in a razor-sharp salute. Behind him, the 2 captains and the entire squad of Marines did exactly the same. "Staff Sergeant Blake, ma'am," the colonel barked, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of grief and total reverence. "It is an honor to finally find you." The entire hospital ward stopped breathing. The silence in the intensive care unit was absolute. The rhythmic, synthetic beeping of the cardiac monitors seemed to fade into a hollow, distant echo. Mr. Robert Sterling, the hospital director, stood entirely frozen, his manicured hand still extended in midair to a man who had completely ignored his existence. Lily Bennett's jaw had practically unhinged. Her meticulously planned photo opportunity was disintegrating before her eyes. She stared at the row of razor-straight, intimidating Marines who were holding a flawless salute directed not at her, not at the director, but at the tired woman holding a bag of soiled hospital linens. Stella didn't move. She didn't drop her gaze. Slowly, the heavy, exhausted mask of the invisible nurse fractured, and the submissive posture she had worn for 5 years evaporated. She straightened her spine, planting her feet shoulder-width apart. She didn't return the salute. She was in civilian scrubs, but she offered a sharp, singular nod. "At ease, Colonel Bradford," Stella said. Her voice, usually a meek whisper designed to avoid Lily's wrath, was suddenly resonant, carrying the unmistakable, commanding timbre of a veteran non-commissioned officer. The Marines snapped their arms down in perfect unison, transitioning to a rigid parade rest. Colonel William Bradford, a man whose chest bore the ribbons of 3 different war zones, let out a breath that sounded like a suppressed sob. "They told us you were gone, ma'am," Colonel Bradford said, his voice grating with raw emotion. "After the ambush in the Arghandab Valley, after the medevac chopper took fire. Command said you didn't make it off the surgical table in Kandahar. We've spent 6 years thinking the best combat medic in the United States Armed Forces was buried in Arlington." "I survived, sir," Stella replied calmly. "But the woman who came back wasn't fit for the uniform anymore. I took my medical discharge and went off the grid. I needed the quiet." "Quiet?" Mr. Sterling finally choked out, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red. He stepped forward, desperately trying to reclaim control of his ward. "Colonel Bradford, I believe there is a massive misunderstanding here. This is Stella. She's just a basic floor nurse. She cleans the bedpans. I assure you, you have the wrong woman." Colonel Bradford turned his head. The look he gave the hospital director was so lethally cold that Sterling physically recoiled, taking 2 steps backward. "Mr. Sterling, is it?" Bradford growled, stepping into the director's personal space. The height difference was marginal, but the colonel's presence made him look 10 feet tall. "Let me educate you on exactly who is standing in your hospital. You are looking at Staff Sergeant Stella Blake, the lead medic of the 75th Ranger Regiment's forward surgical team. In 2019, during a catastrophic ambush, her unit was pinned down by heavy mortar fire. The entire nursing staff, including a pale and trembling Lily, leaned in, hanging on every word. When our designated surgeon was killed by a sniper, Staff Sergeant Blake took command," Bradford continued, his voice rising, echoing down the pristine hallways of Mercy General. "She performed field surgeries in the dirt, under active machine gun fire. When an RPG hit our position, she threw her own body over 2 wounded Marines, taking a chest full of shrapnel to keep them alive. She single-handedly kept 14 men breathing until extraction arrived. She was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action and the Purple Heart. She is a legend in the Special Operations medical community." Bradford turned his gaze away from the sweating director and looked directly at Lily, who suddenly looked very small in her designer scrubs. "And you have her emptying trash cans," Bradford stated, the disgust practically dripping from his teeth. She never said," Lily stammered, stepping back until her back hit the charting counter. "She doesn't have the certifications. She's just a grunt. She has more practical trauma experience in her left pinky finger than this entire floor combined," Bradford fired back. He turned to Stella. "I knew it was you, Stella. I knew it the moment I read Corporal Miller's surgical report this morning." Dr. Paul Henderson, who had been watching the exchange with growing indignation, finally pushed his way to the front. His ego, bruised by being sidelined in his own domain, demanded attention. "Colonel, with all due respect to the military, This is a civilian hospital, Dr. Henderson said loudly, crossing his arms. Corporal Miller's report has nothing to do with Nurse Blake. She is not a doctor. She is not authorized to perform invasive procedures. The life-saving bilateral thoracostomy that saved your Marine was performed by Dr. Adam Lewis. Henderson gestured grandly to the first-year resident standing near the monitors. Nurse Blake merely handed him the tools. Bradford didn't look at Henderson. He looked at Dr. Lewis. The young resident was paper white, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Dr. Henderson's arrogant face, then at Lily's terrified one, and finally his eyes landed on Stella. Stella gave him a gentle, reassuring look, silently giving him permission to maintain the lie. She didn't need the glory. She never had. But Adam Lewis had reached his breaking point. The crushing guilt of taking credit for a masterclass in trauma surgery, combined with the awe-inspiring presence of the Marines, shattered his silence. "No," Dr. Lewis whispered. "What was that, Dr. Lewis?" Henderson snapped. "I said no," Adam said louder, stepping forward, his hands shaking. "I didn't do it. I panicked. Corporal Miller was coding. His flail chest was compressing his heart, and I completely froze. I was going to do compressions. I was going to kill him." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered crowd of administrators and journalists who had snuck in behind the military detail. "Dr. Lewis, watch your words," Mr. Sterling warned, his eyes darting to the flashing cameras in the corridor. "I'm telling the truth," Adam yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Stella. "She pushed me out of the way. She diagnosed the tension pneumothorax in a fraction of a second. She grabbed the scalpel, made the incision blind, and drove the chest tube in with one hand while ordering me to push epi. She didn't just hand me the tools. She orchestrated the entire code. She saved his life. Dr. Henderson, she knew more about trauma surgery in that 3-minute window than you've taught me all year." Dr. Henderson's face turned a violent shade of magenta. He whirled on Stella, his professional facade completely crumbling into furious embarrassment. "You performed an unauthorized surgical procedure?" Henderson shrieked, spit flying from his lips. "Do you realize the liability? You could have killed him. You broke every protocol in the hospital charter. Sterling, I want her terminated immediately. I want her nursing license revoked. Have security escort her off the premises right now." "Are you out of your mind?" Colonel Bradford roared, his voice hitting a decibel that made the windows vibrate. The 2 Marine captains behind him stepped forward, their hands resting ominously on their duty belts. Bradford stepped directly in front of Stella, shielding her from Henderson. "You pompous, arrogant fool. You are going to stand there and threaten to fire the woman who saved the life of a United States Marine? Because she bypassed your precious paperwork to stop a young man from bleeding out in your pristine little ward? She broke the law." Lily piped up, desperately trying to align herself with the doctors. "She's insubordinate. She constantly disobeys my orders to manage the floor." "Your orders?" Stella finally spoke, stepping around the colonel. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her cold, unwavering authority silenced the room instantly. She looked down at Lily, pinning the charge nurse with a gaze forged in literal fire. "My insubordination, Lily, is the only reason half the patients on this ward survive your shifts," Stella said, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. "While you are taking selfies at the nurses' station and falsifying charting times, I am catching the medication errors you authorize. 2 weeks ago, I swapped out a lethal dose of potassium you calculated incorrectly for bed 7. Last month, I intercepted a contraindicated blood thinner doctor. Henderson prescribed without checking the patient's coagulopathy panel. Henderson blanched, stepping back. You have no proof of that. I kept copies of every original unedited chart, Stella replied smoothly, tapping the side of her head. I spent 5 years in the military learning how to document incompetent officers to protect my enlisted men. Did you really think I wouldn't do the same here? Mr. Sterling looked like he was going to pass out. The liability Stella was describing wasn't just grounds for termination. It was grounds for a massive, hospital-ending malpractice lawsuit. Staff Sergeant, Colonel Bradford said gently, placing a massive hand on her shoulder. You don't belong in this miserable place. The base hospital at Joint Base Lewis McChord is looking for a civilian director of emergency trauma training. We need someone who can teach these new kids how to keep their heads when the world explodes. Name your salary. We will fast-track your administrative credentials by tomorrow morning. Stella looked around the ICU. She looked at the polished floor she had mopped, the crash carts she had meticulously restocked, and the patients lying in their beds, completely dependent on the people in this room. Then she looked at Adam Lewis, the young resident who had just sacrificed his career to tell the truth. I appreciate the offer, Colonel, Stella said, a faint, genuine smile finally breaking through her stoic expression. But I think my current battlefield is right here. There are a lot of good people in this hospital who need proper leadership, and a few who need to be forcefully retired. She turned her gaze to Mr. Sterling, who flinched. Director Sterling, Stella said, stepping forward. She wasn't asking, she was dictating terms. You are going to promote Dr. Adam Lewis to Chief Trauma Resident. He has the integrity this hospital desperately lacks. Secondly, Lily Bennett is relieved of her duties as charge nurse, effective immediately. If she wants to stay, she can take my old shifts. Let's see how she handles the bedpans. Lily let out a strangled sob, but Sterling quickly nodded, too terrified of the PR nightmare standing in front of him to argue. And Dr. Henderson, Stella continued, turning to the head of trauma, you are going to step down as head of the ICU. You will submit to a full peer review audit of your prescribing history. If you refuse, I will hand my copied charts over to the state medical board before the sun sets. You can't do this, Henderson whispered, completely defeated. She just did, Colonel Bradford intervened, flashing a terrifying, triumphant grin. He turned to the hospital director. Mr. Sterling, the United States military brings millions of dollars of federal healthcare contracts to this hospital system every year. If Staff Sergeant Blake isn't given the title of Chief Clinical Director of this ICU by close of business today, I will personally ensure every single one of those contracts is severed. Do we have an understanding? Yes, sir, Sterling squeaked, wiping sweat from his brow. Complete understanding. Bradford turned back to Stella. The fierce military commander softened, replaced by a man looking at his savior. He snapped another crisp salute. It's good to have you back on the line, Staff Sergeant, Bradford said quietly. Stella returned the salute this time, her hand perfectly angled, a silent acknowledgement of her past, her present, and the power she had finally reclaimed. It's good to be back, sir, Stella replied, As the Marines marched out of the hospital, leaving a path of stunned silence in their wake, Stella Blake didn't pick up the mop. She walked calmly to the central desk, picked up the charge nurse's clipboard, and began to fix the ward. The invisible nurse was gone forever. The staff sergeant had taken command. Did this story of ultimate respect and hidden heroism leave you speechless? Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest histories. If you love this dramatic twist of fate and the triumph of a true veteran over arrogant hospital bullies, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never judge a book by its cover, and subscribe for more incredible real-life stories.